You are standing on the shadowed veranda of a grand antebellum estate in St. Francisville, Louisiana, where the air is so thick with humidity it feels like a damp shroud pressed against your skin. The scent of sweet olive and rotting magnolia blossoms hangs heavy, cloying and sweet, masking something sharper and more metallic beneath the perfume of the gardens. To your left, the Spanish moss drapes from the ancient oaks like tangled hair, swaying in a breeze you cannot feel on your own face. You hear a floorboard groan behind you, not the sharp crack of settling wood, but the deliberate weight of a footfall. Yet when you turn, the shadows between the white pillars are empty. This is the threshold of the Myrtles Plantation, a place where the barrier between documented history and restless legend has worn so thin that it has practically vanished. Before it became a monument to the macabre, this land was a wilderness of hope and desperation for a man named David Bradford. In 1796, Bradford was a fugitive, a leader of the Whiskey Rebellion, fleeing the wrath of George Washington's government and seeking sanctuary in what was then the Spanish-controlled West Florida. He carved a home out of the brutal Louisiana landscape, naming it Laurel Grove, a title that suggests a peace he likely never fully found. The house he built was sturdy and modest at first, a frontier refuge that would eventually swell into the sprawling 20-room mansion that stands today. But as the foundations were laid into the dark soil of the bayou, the seeds of a different kind of legacy were planted. While Bradford eventually secured a pardon and moved his family to the estate, the isolation of the surrounding swamps created an environment where secrets could be kept and tragedies could ferment in the heat. The transition from a pioneer's sanctuary to a house of mourning began in earnest when the property passed to Bradford's son-in-law, Judge Clark Woodruff. It is within this era that the most enduring and terrifying legend of the Myrtles takes root. The story of a woman named Chloe. According to the lore whispered to every guest who walks these halls, Chloe was an enslaved woman who served the Woodruff family, but found herself caught in a spiral of paranoia and punishment. The legend claims that after being caught eavesdropping on the judge's private conversations, her ear was severed as a penalty, forcing her to wear a vivid green turban to hide the mutilation. Driven by a desperate need to prove her worth, or perhaps seeking a misguided form of revenge, she supposedly baked a birthday cake laced with the juice of boiled oleander leaves, a lethal toxin that grows in abundance on the grounds. The tale takes a harrowing turn as the cake was served not to the judge, but to his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young daughters. Within hours, the poison began its work, and the house was filled with the sounds of a family dying in agony. Panic-stricken and fearing the judge's retribution, the story goes that Chloe's fellow enslaved workers dragged her into the woods and lynched her, throwing her body into the dark waters of the Mississippi River. To this day, visitors claim to see a woman in a green turban wandering the grounds, a silent witness to a crime that may never have happened exactly as the stories suggest. While the tragedy of the Woodruff family is indisputably real, archival records paint a picture that is perhaps even more chilling because of its clinical indifference. Sarah Woodruff and 2 of her children did indeed die within a short window of time in the 1820s. Yet, historical investigators and genealogists point not to a poisoned cake, but to the devastating arrival of the yellow fever. In the mosquito-plagued summers of the South, the black vomit was a frequent and merciless visitor, capable of wiping out entire households before the first symptoms were even understood. This tension between the dramatic myth of Chloe and the biological horror of the fever creates a unique layer of unease. Whether the lives were taken by a vengeful hand or a microscopic predator, the grief that saturated the walls of the Myrtles during that period was absolute, leaving behind a psychological residue that some believe has never truly evaporated. Nowhere is this residue more visible than in the house's most famous artifact, the gold-leafed mirror situated in the main hallway. In the custom of the 19th century South, mirrors were often covered with black cloth when a death occurred in the home. A ritual meant to prevent the soul of the departed from becoming trapped in the reflective glass. The legend of the Myrtles suggests that during the Woodruff funerals, this particular mirror was overlooked. Since then, guests and staff have reported seeing the faint outlines of handprints appearing behind the glass, along with the silhouettes of a woman and children dressed in period clothing. Despite repeated cleanings and even the replacement of the glass, the marks are said to return, manifesting from the inside out. Some dismiss these as silver nitrate spots, a common degradation in antique mirrors caused by the humid Louisiana climate reacting with the backing. Yet, as you stand before it in the dim light of the foyer, the cold logic of chemistry feels insufficient. The way the light bends within the silvering seems to create depths that shouldn't exist, and the sensation of being watched from within the frame is enough to make even the most hardened skeptic look away. It serves as a literal and metaphorical window into the house's past, reflecting a grief so profound that it refuses to be polished out. The shadows of the Myrtles are not confined to the 1820s, however, as the house continued to collect tragedies like dust. Following the Woodruffs, the property saw a succession of owners, but it was in the late 19th century that a documented act of violence left a permanent scar on the architecture itself. William Winter was a lawyer who lived at the plantation during the post-Civil War era, a time of immense social upheaval and lingering resentment. On a cold January night in 1871, Winter was called onto the porch by a stranger who claimed to have urgent business. As he stepped out into the dark, a shot rang out, and Winter was struck in the chest by a blast from a double-barreled shotgun. The mystery of his assassin was never solved, but the horror of his final moments is etched into the very stairs of the house. Fatally wounded, Winter allegedly stumbled back inside and began a desperate crawl up the grand staircase, attempting to reach his wife on the second floor. The legend says he made it to the 17th step before collapsing and dying in her arms. To this day, guests staying in the house report hearing the heavy thud of someone dragging themselves up the stairs, always stopping abruptly at that 17th step. It is the sound of a man dying in a loop, a kinetic memory of a life cut short by a nameless shadow on the porch. Unlike the elusive Chloe, Winter's death is a matter of public record, providing a grim anchor for the paranormal claims that surround the staircase. As the decades passed, the Myrtles transitioned from a private residence to a guest house. And with the influx of visitors came a new wave of reported phenomena that expanded the lore beyond the famous 10 murders often cited in tourist brochures. While historians can only confirm the murder of William Winter, the house seems to generate its own gravity for the unexplained. There is the story of the ghost girl in the French room, a young girl who succumbed to illness and is said to appear in the beds of guests, her presence signaled by a sudden drop in temperature and the feeling of a small hand touching a sleeper's cheek. Observers have noted that many of these reports share a common thread. They involve children or young women, echoing the original losses of the Woodruff family. This suggests a house that is not just haunted by individuals, but by a specific type of sorrow, the mourning of lives that never reached their full potential. The atmosphere in these rooms is one of stagnant air, as if the house itself is holding its breath, waiting for a resolution that can never come. You find yourself drawn toward the back of the house, where the old kitchen stood, separate from the main building to prevent the risk of fire. It is here that the air feels the most oppressive, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that some attribute to the bad ground upon which the plantation was built. Rumors have long persisted that the Myrtles was constructed atop a Tunica Indian burial ground, though no archaeological evidence has ever surfaced to confirm this. This theory often functions as a catch-all explanation for the sheer volume of activity reported on the site, from the sounds of phantom drums to the sightings of a Native American woman wandering the woods. Whether or not the ground is truly cursed, the psychological impact of the theory is undeniable. It frames the Myrtles as a place where layers of human suffering have been stacked one on top of the other. Indigenous displacement, the horrors of chattel slavery, the ravages of disease, and the sudden violence of murder. When you walk the grounds at twilight, the history doesn't feel like a series of dates on a plaque. It feels like a physical weight, an accumulation of energy that the land has no way to discharge. Beyond the major legends, the Myrtles is defined by its smaller and more intimate terrors. There are the reports of the grand piano in the parlor, playing itself at 3 a.m, a mournful melody that stops the moment a human foot enters the room. There are the sightings of a young man in Confederate uniform, leaning against a tree near the pond, his face obscured by a slouch hat. Perhaps most unsettling are the accounts of a phantom dog that is felt more often than seen, brushing against the legs of visitors before vanishing into the floorboards. These incidents don't follow the logic of a traditional narrative. They are fragments of experiences that suggest the house is a repository for every emotion ever felt within its walls. The skepticism regarding the 10 murders claim is valid, as the numbers often feel inflated for the sake of the plantation's reputation as one of America's most haunted homes. Yet, the most frightening thing about the Myrtles isn't the possibility that ghosts are real, but the realization of how easily a life can be forgotten by history and reinvented by folklore. The real Chloe, if she ever existed, is lost to the river. The real William Winter is a name on a headstone. What remains is the house. The creaking stairs, the silvered glass, and the silence that follows the sound of 17 footsteps. As the sun dips below the horizon and the cicadas begin their screaming song, you realize that the shadows of the Myrtles aren't coming from the past. They are standing right beside you, waiting for the night to truly begin. And you are left to wonder which part of your own story might stay behind when you finally walk away.